Matt Armstrong has built a reputation as the go-to guy for rebuilding wrecked supercars. But in late 2024, he took on a crashed Bugatti Chiron Pur Sport and ended up in a direct standoff with Bugatti after they locked the car out of their entire parts network. How do you rebuild a hypercar when the manufacturer cuts off every single part, using nothing but fabricated pieces and whatever you can scrounge from a workshop? Join us as we find out what really happened to Matt Armstrong and his Bugatti rebuild. Matt Armstrong rebuilds crash-damaged cars, cheap cars, cars with history, and films it all for YouTube. That's what he does. In the summer of 2024, Alex Gonzalez, a Miami-based content creator, had owned his purple Bugatti Chiron Pur Sport for just 3 weeks. It was the crown jewel of his collection, a car so exclusive that only 60 were ever built, designed for track performance with 1,479 horsepower and a price tag that could climb well past $6 million. Then in an instant, everything changed. While merging onto the highway late one night, Gonzalez drifted into a blind spot and rear-ended a 1987 Suzuki carry truck. The impact set off every airbag in the car, even the ones embedded in the floor. The hood tore loose, the windshield cracked, and the front end was left completely mangled. Thankfully, both drivers walked away without serious injury. When a technician arrived from Monocoque to inspect the wreckage, the verdict was immediate: total loss. Insurance paid out, and the car was sent to a Copart salvage auction in North Miami. That could have been the end of the story. Instead, Gonzalez bought it back himself for somewhere between $1.6 and $1.9 million, making it the most expensive vehicle Copart had ever sold. For a while, the wreck just sat on the basketball court at his home. Parts were stolen off it during the auction process, but Gonzalez tracked them down and got them back. Still, the bigger question remained: what do you actually do with a destroyed hypercar? He went back to Bugatti. The first quote came in at around $1.7 million for parts alone, with no guarantee on the final cost, and a timeline that could stretch to 2 years. A second offer dropped the price to $600,000, but only if the car was returned completely untouched. Gonzalez refused, so he looked elsewhere. In October 2024, he reached out to Matt Armstrong. When Matt arrived in Miami and saw the Bugatti in person, the damage was worse than he expected. The engine mount had snapped clean in two. The engine itself had shifted backward. Pipes were crushed, and even the carbon tub showed signs of impact. Armstrong looked at it and called the damage absolutely brutal. But then he agreed to take it on. What he didn't know at that point was that fixing the car wouldn't be his first challenge. By October 20th, 2024, just 7 days after Matt Armstrong's visit to Miami, Bugatti locked the car's VIN. They blacklisted the car across Bugatti's global dealer network. No authorized dealer could order or supply genuine parts for it. Not headlights, not a windscreen, not even small brackets. The only solution Bugatti offered was to ship the car to its factory in Monocoque, France, which Gonzalez had already refused. In November 2024, he posted an Instagram reel that quickly went viral. In the post, he issued a direct ultimatum to Bugatti, giving the company just 24 hours to unblack his car, or he would 3D print all the parts himself. Unsurprisingly, the response came from the very top. Mate Rimac sent Gonzalez a direct message explaining that the VIN lock was a safety measure. He offered to temporarily lift it and suggested a supervised repair collaboration. The two later spoke on the phone, and Bugatti briefly removed the blacklist, but their peace agreement didn't last. Gonzalez later accused Rimac of being disingenuous, arguing the company was more focused on control than helping a customer who legally owned the car. Bugatti held to its position that no parts would be supplied for repairs done outside certified workshops. The company then reinstated the VIN lock. On January 16, 2025, Rimac addressed the situation publicly in a video. He described Matt Armstrong as a great guy and a fellow enthusiast, but he still voiced concerns over Armstrong's attempts to rebuild the Bugatti. According to him, the Chiron Pur Sport's carbon monocoque was engineered for speeds above 260 miles per hour. After a high-impact crash, structural damage could exist even if it wasn't visible. Rimac explained that a proper assessment could only be done at the factory. 3 days later, on January 19, 2025, Armstrong responded publicly. He acknowledged Rimac's concerns and said he understood Bugatti's position, but he also made his decision clear. He would move forward with the rebuild anyway, waive any warranty claims, and take full responsibility for the result. Then Matt got to work. The first real step for Matt and his team was to correct the structural damage buried deep inside the Bugatti. However, to reach the damage, Matt had to split the car in two. The carbon fiber monocoque, the core structure of the Chiron, had to be separated front from rear to access the gearbox housing and the broken engine mount. Bugatti's position was clear. This wasn't something you attempt outside a factory. The process required specialist equipment, precision jigs, and trained technicians. Without that, it simply couldn't be done safely. Nonetheless, Matt did it anyway. His team removed 14 titanium bolts and disconnected everything linking both halves. Coolant lines, hydraulics, brakes, wiring, even propeller shaft. To support the rear section as the car came apart, they improvised using the wheelbase of a workshop bin. Then they pulled it apart in a clean split. Despite their success, Armstrong acknowledged on camera that the rebuild wouldn't meet Bugatti's factory standards, but he and his team were still determined to continue. When the video dropped on February 8, 2025, it pulled over 11 million views. Some saw it as proof that manufacturers overstate what's impossible when it comes to car repairs. Others saw a 1,500 horsepower hypercar being dismantled without proper safeguards. Both views had a point. But once the car was open, the real problem revealed itself. The damage inside the Chiron was far worse than it looked from the outside. The cast aluminum bracket linking the engine to the gearbox had snapped clean in two. The gearbox housing was cracked on both sides. The engine had been pushed forward on impact, stopped only by the prop shaft pressing into billet aluminum, likely preventing even more serious drivetrain damage. Across the engine bay, pipes were crushed. The carbon tub had taken direct hits and showed visible dents. Parts were scattered everywhere, many needing replacement, not because they were destroyed, but because no Bugatti dealer would supply them while the VIN remained locked. Matt summed it up simply. Almost all the parts needed rebuilding. They would have to either 3D print or fabricate and fix parts themselves. The teardown began immediately. The starter motor was removed, fluids drained, and by late February 2025, the car was stripped to its core. Panels off, systems disconnected, components laid out across the workshop. On February 15th, Matt revealed the full plan. The broken engine mount bracket would be 3D scanned, turned into a C80 model, and then either CNC machined or repaired if possible. The factory exhaust was sent off for scanning, so a louder custom version could be built. Crushed coolant lines and pipe work would be remade in-house. Damaged body panels, including the bumper, splitter, hood, and front-end sections, would be repaired or recreated with 3D printing. The deployed airbags all needed replacing. The front-end wiring had to be rebuilt. The windscreen and headlights, which Bugatti wouldn't supply, would be sourced elsewhere or fabricated. After that would come gearbox repairs, interior work, and a full realignment. In short, almost every part of the car needed attention, but everything hinged on one piece, the snap bracket that left the engine sitting out of place. If that couldn't be fixed, nothing else would matter. Everything hinged on the bracket. Without it, the engine and gearbox couldn't sit correctly. They had two options. First, scan the broken piece, build a C80 model, and machine a new one. But even a tiny error just a few millimeters could throw off the sensors and cause rough idling, misfires, or a complete failure to start. The second option was to repair the original and keep the factory dimensions intact. They chose to repair it. The bracket was sent to Bob, a specialist machinist Matt found through his network. He worked out a place called a machine shop, not a Bugatti dealer or a hypercar facility, just a skilled machinist willing to take on a job most would avoid. The material made things harder. It was a magnesium-rich aluminum alloy, the kind that cracks under heat instead of bending. One mistake would destroy the only original part they had. Bob took his time. He studied the metal, confirmed it could be welded, and cleaned the broken surfaces until they fit together perfectly. Then he welded it. It held. Matt later called it the make-or-break moment of the entire project. While that was happening, work continued elsewhere. Matt ordered a custom exhaust from Valvetronic. The stock W16 is quiet by design, so the new system was built to be louder with a custom 2-6 X-pipe. The secondary catalytic converters were removed, but the primaries and sensors stayed. The layout was tested with 3D printed templates before the final version was built. On March 3rd, Matt flew to Miami with the finished system. For the rest of the car, they had to get creative. Anything Bugatti wouldn't supply had to be sourced or made. Some parts carried VW group numbers and could be pulled from other vehicles. The rest were repaired or built from scratch. Slowly, the car started to come back together. The repaired bracket went back in first. Then came the harder part, bringing the car back into one piece. The front and rear monocoque sections had to align perfectly. Even slight misalignment would cause problems once the car was moving. They eased the two halves together. 14 titanium bolts secured the structure. One had snapped during teardown, so it was replaced with a new one from ProBolt. There was a small but important detail here. Titanium bolts need anti-seize or they can lock up under torque. With the structure set, everything else followed. Coolant lines, hydraulics, brakes, wiring, and the prop shaft were all reconnected. The Valvetronic exhaust went in last, guided into place using the 3D printed templates. Piece by piece, the car came back to life. What had arrived as a write-off was now whole again. But none of it mattered until the engine ran. The W16 hadn't started since the crash. Every decision, the weld, the custom parts, the rebuild, came down to this moment. On March 8, 2025, with fluids topped up and the car back on its wheels, Matt turned the key. The W16 fired instantly. The new Valvetronic exhaust entirely changed the sound, making it deeper, sharper, and far more aggressive than stock. Then the engine settled into a smooth idle. There were no misfires, no warning lights, and most impressive of all, no fault codes. Then Matt put the Bugatti into gear, and the car rolled forward and then back. After weeks of repairs and fittings, everything held together. The repaired bracket kept the engine and gearbox perfectly aligned. The rejoined monocoque handled the load without issue. For the first time since the crash, the car was moving under its own power. There was one small problem, a minor fuel leak, but it was spotted on camera and fixed immediately. This wasn't a polished reveal. It was a workshop basic tools, a machine shop weld, a custom exhaust, and a car that worked. Valvetronic even commented on the video. The response overall was overwhelmingly positive. Praise for Bob's repair, the exhaust sound, and the fact that the entire process had been shown step by step, including the setbacks. A week later, on March 15th, Matt posted a follow-up to address a rumor. Viewers watching in 4K thought they had spotted a hairline crack in the gearbox housing. The original Copart listing had mentioned cracks, so people assumed something had been missed. Matt checked it on camera. He ran his finger over the mark and confirmed it wasn't a crack, just paint over spray and dirt from a crash. The car was fine. The build was still on track. By then, the whole project had the industry talking. While Armstrong and his team worked through the rebuild, people across the automotive industry were paying attention. Voxel Matters, a publication covering additive manufacturing, reported that the project had put 3D printing front and center in discussions about the future of automotive repair. The bracket fabrication and exhaust routing templates were used as examples of what independent shops could now do without manufacturer support. Meanwhile, collectors raised a different concern. A car with a salvage title, a rebuilt VIN, and no factory certification cannot be insured at anything close to its original value. It cannot realistically be sold. With only 60 Pur Sports ever made, some argue that one of them had effectively been removed from existence as a collectible, not by the crash, but by the decision to rebuild it outside Bugatti's process. Safety was the other question. Bugatti's Monocoque is engineered for speeds above 260 miles per hour. After a high-impact crash, internal damage to the carbon structure is not always visible. On Reddit, users pointed out that no independent inspection of the chassis had been published and that the car was being reassembled in a private workshop with no external verification of its structural integrity. Bugatti's VIN lock also drew comment. Several outlets compared it to parts restrictions imposed by John Deere and Apple, manufacturers that limit access to components and repair documentation in ways that push owners back toward official service channels. Gonzalez legally owned the car. The question of whether that ownership extended to the right to repair it independently had no straightforward answer. No formal action was taken against Matt. No lawsuits, no industry body statements. But the conversations as rebuild started about what manufacturers can control after sale and what independent shops can now fabricate were still going on when the car was broken down. As the Chiron was stripped down, one detail kept coming up. Not every part inside, it was unique to Bugatti. Some sensors, fittings, and smaller components carried VW Group part numbers, the same ones used across Autos and other vehicles in the group. That meant certain parts could be sourced outside official Bugatti channels. On its own, that isn't unusual. Bugatti sits at the top of the VW Group, and shared components are standard across large manufacturers. But in this case, it shifted the conversation. Bugatti's pricing and its strict control over parts lean on the idea that these cars are entirely exclusive, that the components, the engineering, and the process are inseparable, and that only the factory at Motium can properly handle them. Once the car was in pieces and those part numbers were visible, that position became harder to fully defend. It didn't prove the safety concerns wrong, and it didn't make the collector value argument disappear. But it did raise a different question. How much of that control is really about engineering, and how much is about protecting a system built on exclusivity? As of late March 2025, the car is running. The monocoque has been split and rejoined, the bracket repaired and reinstalled, and the custom exhaust fitted. The W16 has started and moved under its own power for the first time since the crash. Even so, the project isn't finished. The bodywork still needs attention. The interior remains stripped, and the car hasn't been road tested or registered. There's no clear completion date yet. Bugatti hasn't stepped in to stop the build, while Gonzalez has hinted at legal options and right-to-repair arguments. For now, both sides seem to be holding their positions without forcing a confrontation. What the project has made clear is something the hypercar world rarely has to face directly. Owning a car like this doesn't always mean full control over it. You may own the vehicle itself, but not necessarily the freedom to decide how it's repaired. Gonzalez summed up his position on Facebook, writing that people shouldn't let anyone tell them something is impossible, even if that person is the CEO of a billion-dollar company. That's ultimately what this rebuild has brought into focus. VIN locks, parts blacklisting, and what right to repair really means when the product costs millions. These debates usually stay theoretical, but now there's a real example people can point to. Matt Armstrong's path to this point has followed a familiar pattern. Starting small, proving people wrong, and scaling up each time. The difference now is the scale. This isn't just another rebuild. It's the biggest version of that same idea, and the stakes have